Welcome to the class. Today's topic is ecological succession. So succession is what? It is a unidirectional progressive series. It is a unidirectional progressive series of changes which lead to the establishment of relatively stable climax community. So if we talk about succession is basically a unidirectional progressive changes. That means what? Suppose this is an, if you see a field which has nothing in it, it is a naked field, right? We can call it as a naked field. After some time you will see that some grasses will come right on it. So these are the first plant or first grasses on this naked plant, right? After that what will happen, these grasses will be replaced by another type of grasses, and this is the second type of plant, right? And this again will be replaced by a very stable kind of trees. You can say these are trees. These are the final plants which are, these are, you can say these are the last end point. This you can say is the final plants which is occupying this area. Nobody can replace the trees, right? So this unidirectional, this changes, we called it what? We called it succession. Clear everyone what is succession? Succession means what? It is basically a unidirectional progressive series of changes which lead to establishment. It should be which lead to establishment of relatively stable climax community, right? So what is succession? Suppose a naked land is covered, a bare naked land is covered by grasses. These grasses will be replaced by another plant community, and this will be replaced by another plant. So this entire process we call it succession. Clear everyone? Succession. The first species, the first type of plant or the first type of living organism which gets established on this naked land, is known as pioneer species. So what is pioneer species? Pioneer species is what? Let me define it here. Pioneer species, this is the first species which occupy the first species which occupy the first living species which occupy the naked area or the bare rock, naked land, or you can say bare rock, right? So the first plants or first living organisms which occupy this field, we call it what? Pioneer species, right? And after that, this first species again will be replaced by second species will be replaced by third species, right? Like in case of human, how generation keeps on changing. Initially you can see your grandmother generation, then your mother generation, then yours generation, right? So that is how same thing happened with the plants also, right? So this entire process we call this succession, and the final plants or final trees which gets established, and these are perennial plants, that means they live for many years. This is known as succession. And the first organism or first living organisms which occupy the naked field or bare rock, we call it first pioneer. This is first pioneer species, right? And the last one, the last tree and plants which occupy the last position, or you can say end point of succession, we call it climax community. Clear? So the living organisms which occupy the first naked area, we call it pioneer stage, and the living organisms which occupy the last area, we call it climax community, right? And the stages in between, you can say this is the intermediate stage. These stages we call it several stages, right? We call it what? These stages several stages, right? So what we have learned from this is succession is basically a unidirectional progressive series of changes which leads to the establishment of relatively stable chain climax community, right? So this is naked area. The first organisms which occupy this naked area, we call it pioneer species, which gets replaced by other species, and the end species, or you can say the last species which occupy that particular area, we call it climax community. And the intermediate species, we call it several stages, right? Okay, so what is the mechanism of succession? How it is happening actually, this succession? The mechanism of successions can be explained with the help of the following steps. That means what? The for establishing a succession, we need a nudation. Nudation means what? Basically, it stands for naked area. It stands for naked area. So if I draw a naked area here, this is a naked area. It do not have any kind of living organism, right? Invasion or migration. Invasion or migration means what? One type of species you can say they can change their position and get established into a new area, right? So for example, say if I compare it with an analogy, suppose if your father is working in any kind of Air Force or like Indian Army, then your father will have a transfers, right, according to the time schedule. So when the transfer will be assigned, when the transfer will be done, then what will happen? You will keep changing your position, you will keep changing the schools. Same thing here in case of plants also. Some plants just keep on changing their area, right? So the new plants which will be arriving on it, invasion or migration is the new plant which will be coming to a very new area. You can say entry of new species, entry of new plants. So this naked plant is now covered with a new plants. Say for example, these are small grasses which have occupied the area, right? So these are the small grasses. Ecasis means what? The establishment of the species. Ecasis is basically establishment of the pioneer species. Since these are the first living organisms which occupy this area, so we call it pioneer species. We called it what? We called it pioneer species, right? Now this species will undergo certain modifications and get adjusted to this new area, right? So we call this establishment of new plant wealthy, or you can say when a plant gets totally adjusted to the new area, we call that ecasis. Aggregation is basically what? Aggregation is basically the growth of the vegetation. These plants will start growing, right? So after some time you can say the height of the plants will be increased. This is aggregation. Now you can see as the height of the plants are increasing, as plants are growing, initially there are more space here, but now in this case there is very less space, no space is there, right? So as a result, because of the less of space, less of resources, there will be a competition between the existing plants. Competition between what? Existing plants. And in that competitions, the one type of plant, suppose there is a competition between these plants. Now what will happen? After certain time you will see that these plants might have died off, or these plants might have died off, right? So what will be the reaction after the competition is the successful species will occupy the area and the unsuccessful species will be thrown out from the area. So this you can see reaction will be only the successful species will occupy the area, right? And stabilization means what? Those successful species which gets occupied or which survive after competition establishes a very stable community, right? So that is all about the mechanism of succession. So here I have defined every point. You can see here nudation. Nudation means what? Succession begins with a bare site called nudation. Bare means what? Those sites which do not have any kind of living organism. So here the point to be noted is bare site. So nudation means what? The site which do not contains any kind of living organism. It is totally free, right? Totally naked, you can say. Coming to invasion and migration, many species reach a new site from another area. So that is what we call the invasion, or you can say migration. For example, seeds, spores, right? Spores gets dispersed. So this is how spores gets introduced into a new area and starts developing. Ecasis is what? The process of successful establishment, growth of initial vegetation. So that is what? Once the new species comes to a very new area, two conditions, two chances are there. Either the species adjusts itself to the new area and get established, which is what we call ecasis, or either it is thrown out or the another option is what, it will not survive in the new environment, right? So if it gets successful establishment, we call it ecasis. Now, once successful establishment is done, there will be a development of competitions. Why? Because there will be less space, less resources for the existing plants. So the plants will start competing among each other for the food, resources, lights, nutrients, etc., etc. Right? Then coming to your reaction, during this phase, autogenic changes such as buildup of humus affect the vegetation, one community replace the other. So after competition, you can see what happened. One type of plant will survive, other plant may get autogenic changes. Auto means self replacement. Auto stands for self. Genic stands for cell genetic composition, replace them. Suppose for example, if I say this is an area here, this is an area, and here are the plants is growing. Now because of the competition and less of food, what will happen, the plants automatically this plants automatically changes like this, right? So that is what self replacement. There is no any external factor for these changes. So that changes we call it autogenic changes. Then stabilization. Of course, stabilization means those plants which survive will establish a very stable climax community, right? Okay. Next, we will see the types of ecological successions. If we talk about the types of ecological successions, there are basically 4 types of ecological successions. The first is your primary and secondary succession, and this classification is based on the starting. Starting means what? Naked area, right? The organisms which occupy the naked area, first organism will be called as pioneer as well as primary species. And after the first living organism, the second species which will come, that is known as secondary species. So that is what it is based on, starting the living organisms which occupy the starting area, right? Next is your autogenic and allogenic succession. Autogenic comes from 2 words. See here, auto plus genic, right? So these are basically this classification, autogenic and allogenic classification is based on cause. What cause? Let me tell you. Auto means self. Auto means what? Self. So these are those species which get self replacement. Right? Suppose you are staying in a house. Say here, let me compare it with an analogy here. Suppose this is a house. You are taking a rent house here. Now after some time you find that this house is not very comfortable for you. So what will you do? You will change your house. You will shift to a new house, new rented house. So that is what, no external factor ask you to enter to vacate the room, right? It is according to your choice you are shifting. So that is what we call autogenic. Auto means self. Always on the self priority, the organism will change the places, right? And allelogenic means what will happen in case of allelogenic? There will be an involvement of external factors. External factors will involved for the succession. For example, say if this is an area here, say this is an area, right? And these are the so many plants is growing here. Now what will happen? These are similar type of plants, but you will see there is a very new plant here, and this new plant is secreting some kind of toxin, and this toxin is eliminating all those plants. This toxin eliminates all those plants. So that is what we call allelogenic. Why allogenic? Because the plant gets replaced due to the toxic produced by another plant. So that is what is the external factor here? External factor is your toxin, right? So that is what we called it. That is why we call it autogenic and allelogenic succession, right? Next, if I compare it with an analogy, you can see here, in case of allogenic succession, suppose you are in a rented house again, but what will happen in this house? You have liked the ambience also, but what will happen? The owner want to renovate the house. So in that case, the owner will ask you to vacate the house because you want to go for renovation, right? So here external factor is asking you to vacate the room, and the external factor is your renovation. So that is what we call allelogenic succession, right? Okay, now we will see this in detail a bit. Coming to primary and secondary succession starts from a bare rock, of course, where no previous living material is found. This is previous, right? So this is all about the naked area where no other living organism is there. Now suppose the plants gets established to this naked area. So this plants we call it pioneer species as well as your primary species. In case of dry area, there may be a development of lichens, and in case of water rich area, there is a development of phytoplankton. Coming to secondary succession. Secondary succession means what? Suppose if I draw this land again here, initially we have this plant, this type of plants, right? But now if this gets replaced by another type of plant, suppose due to you can say firing, you can say due to natural disaster, say flood or firing, this species gets replaced with a new species, and the new species is your trees, right? So now these trees occupy this area second time, so we call it secondary succession, right? So because of higher snowfall, this species gets replaced and the new species entered in this area, and it leads to the secondary successions. Coming to autogenic and allogenic succession, already explained you. Auto means self-replacement, like your rented house concept. So this is a land, you are inside the house, so you don't want this, you are not feeling comfortable in this house, so you want to change your house, right? So you will shift to another house, with a good ambience, right? So that is what self-replacement, you yourself has changed the house, right? So that is what we call it autogenic succession. So in case of plants, same thing happens if it is according to the plant wish. If plants undergo self modifications or self replacement, then we call it autogenic succession. Coming to allelogenic succession, again replacement of existing community by external conditions. See this, by external condition, right? So that is what we call it allelogenic succession. Coming to autotrophic and heterotrophic, we all know autotrophic is plant, heterotrophic is other organism. Heterotrophs, fungi, bacteria, actinomycetes. This should be actinomycetes, right? So here autotrophic succession stands for the plant which synthesized their own food. Auto means self, trophic means nutrition. So these are those organisms which prepare their own food. So early community of autotrophic succession stands for the plants. Heterotrophic succession is characterized by an early dominance of heterotroph. Heterotroph is kind of a, you can say, which cannot prepare their own food. Different mode of nutrition. This stands for different mode. You can, hetero means different and troph means nutrition. It depends on different sources for food. Example is your bacteria, fungi and actinomycetes. Coming to hydros here. Hydros here is basically a hydro means water. Comes from two words again. What are the two words? Hydro stands for water. So in this case, we will be talking about a ecological succession which starts from an area where water is abundantly present. Example, pond, ocean, right? So in case of pond and ocean also, they undergo succession. And when we are talking about pond and water, we use the term hydros here, right? So here we will be discussing about the ocean, or you can say pond. And the first community in the pond or ocean is known as phytoplankton. These are the first pioneer community in hydrosphere is your phytoplankton. Coming to gerosphere. Gero means what? Gero means, you can say, dry area. Dry area, right? So it is an ecological succession starting from where water content is very less. Water content is less. So here pioneer community will be your lichens, right? Next, microsphere. Micro, from the name only you can suggest. This deals with the microorganisms. This deals with what? Microorganisms. So here succession of microorganisms such as bacteria and fungi in a microhabitat, right? Next, this is no need to remember this. This is just a table to explain you how the succession takes place in water. So the pioneer species is your You can say this is a pioneer species. What is a pioneer species in hydrosphere? It is your phytoplankton stage. Pioneer species. So you can get 1 marks question here. Name the pioneer species in hydrox succession. It should be, your answer will be phytoplankton stage. Right? Now this is rooted submerged, rooted floating, sedge meadow, woodland, and then your forest stage. So here forest stage is the last stage. So we call it climax community. We call it climax community. From water it changed to forest. From climax, how water area gets modified to forest area. So this is called climax community, and these stages are your intermediate. These stages are your intermediate stages. Rooted, submerged, rooted, floating, sedge meadow, woodland. So this we call it seral stages. This we call it what? Seral stages, because they are intermediate stages, right? Students, if you have any doubt, you can ask me, and let me give you a very quick summary of the class. Let's move to a very quick summary. Whatever we have studied in today's class, I will compile it in one slide so that it will be easy for you to understand, right? So what we have studied is about succession. Now what is succession? First of all, succession is a unidirectional changes. Means always takes place in one direction. So we can say that it is a unidirectional changes. So what are the changes basically happens in succession? This is a, you can say this is a naked area, right? This naked area is overcome by some grasses, small grasses, right? So this again gets modified to another shrubs and herbs. This gets modified to, you can say, another type of shrubs, and finally you can see there is a development of trees here. Trees, right? These are the trees. So here what we call this is called naked area. This is called naked area. This is the first species which gets occupied to this naked area. So we will be calling it what? Pioneer species. Pioneer species. And this is the last species which gets occupied. So we will be calling it climax community. We will be calling it climax community. And these stages, you can see here, these stages are basically intermediate stages. So we call it seral stages. So we call it seral stages. So these are the things we have seen. These things we have seen today in the class. And types of ecological succession. We have seen the type of ecological succession. How many types? First is your primary and secondary type of succession. This is based on your starting. The organisms which occupy first will be called as primary, and the organisms which occupy second will be called as your secondary. Then we have seen autogenic and allogenic. Autogenic are those organisms or those plants which undergo self-replacement or self-modification, and allogenic are those species which gets modified or which gets replaced due to the involvement of external factor. Third, we have seen primary, secondary, autogenic, allogenic. Third, we have seen autotrophic and heterotrophic. So autotrophic, we have seen that the dominant community is your plant, and in case of heterotrophs, we have seen these are basically the organisms which are dependent on other organisms for food. These are basically of fungi, bacteria, and actinomycetes, etc., etc. Apart from this, we have also focused on three major things: hydrosphere, right? Xerosphere, you can say, and microsphere. So hydrosphere is basically what? Hydrosphere is the area which is abundant in water. In case of xerosphere, it is dry area, or you can say water absence. Microsphere deals with microorganism like bacteria, fungi, and algae, right? So that is all about we have seen today. Apart from this, let me tell you the stages about the hydrosphere, hydrac succession. Stages of hydrac succession are: first the pioneer species is your phytoplankton, right? phytoplankton, then rooted submerged, rooted submerged. Third is your rooted floating, right? Fourth is your rooted sedge meadow, sedge meadow. Fifth is your woodland, and sixth is your forestage, right? So this is all about the today's class summary. So if you have any doubts, you can ask me, right? Thank you so much, students, for attending the session. Thank you so much.